Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Poshan Maah of 2022, which is the first Poshan Maah after the pandemic's waned. Our idea today is to take the viewers through the work that we are doing at Sitara IIT Bombay in the Center of Excellence for Child Nutrition. We call it CHINU. But it's not just child nutrition, it is child nutrition and health. And we are also looking at certain issues of public health on a larger perspective. The three facets of malnutrition: underweight, stunting, and wasting among children. But our story will really remain incomplete if we do not look at the child mortality data. Now, luckily, NFHS-4 and NFHS-5, they do provide estimates, both the rounds, for neonatal mortality, the infant mortality, that is within 1 year of life, and under 5 mortality. It's worth noting that child mortality is usually skewed towards younger ages. That means neonatal mortality will account for a large fraction of the infant mortality. That in turn accounts for a large fraction of the under 5 mortality, which, though not covered here, will in turn account for a fairly large fraction of the mortality of children under 10. So this is something which we should keep in mind. Another point that has to be kept in mind is there could be sample size limitations, and therefore NFHS has given only state level estimates. District level samples are rather small for calculation of mortality levels, and this is particularly so for neonatal and infant mortality, because we are looking at just children under the age of 1. Nevertheless, I think let us see how the patterns look like. So first we go to neonatal mortality across NFHS-4 and NFHS-5, and we will notice that there has been an improvement. Now here again, kindly keep it in mind that we have taken cutoffs at the NFHS-4 level, and we are looking at how has the situation changed. So the cutoffs have been kept same, and we would notice that there have been gainers. Rajasthan and Gujarat have gained. Down south, you get a contiguous belt where the neonatal mortality rates are lower. But the area of concern remains this central eastern belt, essentially UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, and Odisha. On the northeast, Assam is a bit of a concern. And if you would also notice that these hilly states and Punjab, Haryana, Himachal, they are fairly close to turning into the green zone. And it's quite possible that as we speak or when the NFHS next round comes, they would have made that transition. Moving on, we look at how the story unfolds in terms of the infant mortality rate. Again, we would see that if you look at the infant mortality rate cutoffs using NFHS-4 data, we see an improvement. There is a belt which is stretching from Himachal all the way to Gujarat, where Rajasthan is a major gainer. We are also seeing that down south gains have been made, though Andhra and Telangana are marginally, particularly Telangana is marginally missing the story. This belt of central and eastern states does remain a matter of concern. West Bengal again has, West Bengal infant mortality rates had been traditionally good, though the decline is not happening as fast as one would wish to. From here, we move on to under 5 mortality, and we again see similar picture. Rajasthan does gain, Karnataka gains here, Telangana gains, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh remain an area of concern. Uttarakhand is a bit of a surprise, but that is how the situation is. When we look at infant mortality rates or under 5 mortality rates or neonatal mortality, a question would come to our mind that is it possible to do some cross-checking or triangulation of this data? So what we did was we have looked at the SRS data, which periodically or every year brings out infant mortality rate estimates. And this is how the picture looks like. We have taken NFHS-4 data and we have taken SRS bulletin of 2016. And we find the picture to be more or less similar, except in some cases there are differences between what the SRS data, what the HMIS data is showing here on the what the NFHS-4 data is showing and what the SRS data is showing. This is particularly so for Bihar and Jharkhand. Now that discrepancy is fairly large. Otherwise, if you notice, even in the case of Chhattisgarh, the discrepancy is rather large. But if you look at the relative performance, the two maps tend to coincide to some extent. Again, we notice that Jammu Kashmir, Himachal, there are differences. Punjab, where SRS figures and NFHS figures don't exactly match. Also come to NFHS-5. We again see that NFHS-5 results and SRS results. The SRS data shows lower infant mortality rates. This is something which one needs to take into account. In our view, time series analysis of infant mortality rates, if one has to do, it is probably better to stick to a consistent annual data which is coming from SRS. But it's good to make this comparison. What you notice is both sets of information do talk about UP, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh and Odisha remaining a matter of concern. The estimates when it comes to Bihar and Jharkhand do seem to vary significantly. And the fact does remain that Haryana, Rajasthan and Gujarat need to make, Gujarat has actually done better as per SRS estimates. But then the fact is, if you go by NFHS-5, Punjab, Haryana, Rajasthan and Gujarat may need to make some more efforts to bring their infant mortality rates down. We will leave the story here. It is important that while we analyze the child malnutrition, we also take a look at this important data set related to infant mortality, under 5 mortality, because there's an interesting question coming up as to why, or as why could it be that the infant mortality or child mortality rates in India have declined faster than decline in child malnutrition. There could be various interpretations. Is the health segment reach or delivery of services better, more effective, which may not be happening in the case of ICDS, or there could be other reasons. We leave it to you to think about it And we will take one more important output or parameter, which is anemia among children, adolescent girls, pregnant women, and other women. Watch this space. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, I am Ashi Khare and I am a PhD research scholar at the Center for Technology Alternatives in Rural Areas at IIT Mumbai. And I'm currently working on the field of nutrition and product development. So I have been associated with the nutrition group here at IITB from the very beginning of my PhD, and now it's been some 3 years of lots of learning experiences. And I hold a master's degree in biotechnology. So the work that I did at that point was to quantify the effect of air pollution on human health. So the transition from air pollution to nutrition itself was a task, and the nature of my current work in my PhD demanded me to learn different aspects of nutrition as well as malnutrition across different regions in the country and among different age groups. So, being a part of the nutrition group really helped me to understand and appreciate the magnitude of the situation well. And that in turn helped me to really work better towards finding alternative solutions to the problem of malnutrition. And my current focus is on the problem of anemia in the country, which is unfortunately extremely prevalent in India among adolescent girls and women. So, anemia is a condition which ultimately leads to degraded potential and poor health among women. And specifically, it raises complications, life threatening complications during pregnancy and childbirth. So, there are various government policies which are in place and various interventions which are there which focus on supplementation and fortification practices, but they fail to bring the desired impact. And this is exactly where my work comes into play. So, my current job is to find food based alternatives and food based solutions to the problem of anemia. So, I will be working towards developing products which are rich in iron as well as which have high iron bioavailability. That once a person consumes it, it gets easily and readily absorbed by our body. So recently, I along with a colleague of mine, Mr. Milind Kumar, UK, he's a master student here at Sitara. We were fortunate enough to be invited at the conference which was hosted by the Geneva Health Forum in Switzerland, and to present our work there. And we were amongst the four speakers from over the world who were selected to present our talk at the Science Speed Talks event, which were held there. So that itself was an amazing experience and a great opportunity. And yeah, I hope that the work that I'm currently doing proves to be a productive alternative to the existing approaches that we have in order to reduce the burden of anemia in India. And yeah, that's all about me at the moment and my research. Thank you so much.
Hello everyone, good evening. I am Ashi Khare and I'm from India. So I grew up in a family of doctors, and that's why growing up I was always fascinated by this idea of how knowledge can be used as a tool to save lives. So this is exactly what motivated me to do what I do. I'm currently a PhD student at the Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai, and I'm working towards finding alternative solutions to the problem of malnutrition, specifically anemia, in my country. And yeah, I mean, that's all about my work. And I'm doing this not as a medical doctor like my South Asian family would have preferred, but I'm hoping to do my bit as a researcher. And apart from my work, I'm someone who enjoys to eat, as you can clearly see, and travel. And I paint at times, and I find my escape in singing. So, and I'm extremely excited. I'm a little nervous to be here tonight speaking to all of you. Yeah, so I'll begin my talk by telling you all about Reema. So Reema is this average adolescent girl from rural India, but she's anemic. So anemia is basically a condition which is marked by lower hemoglobin levels in the blood, which ultimately leads to poor health and degraded potential, which is not something which we desire. So now coming back to Reema. So Reema will grow up to become an anemic woman who then gets married early and then falls pregnant. Now, apart from the risk she has to her own health, she is at high risk of giving birth to either a stillborn baby, a preterm child, or an anemic baby. Now, this child with poor growth and development will have poor educational as well as economic potential, which will ultimately lead to poor nutrition all over again, and thus this vicious cycle of anemia continues. So much so that every second woman in my country is anemic. So does that mean that the government is not doing anything about it or is simply ignoring the issue? No, that's not the case at all. In fact, there are several policies which are already in place and several interventions that have been implemented, but they fail to bring the desired impact. And this is exactly where our research comes into play. So we have analyzed the very recent National Family Health Survey data for the year 2019 and 21 for the prevalence of anemia among women throughout the country. And we found out three main findings. The first one being we found out different clusters, high burden clusters as well as low burden clusters scattered all across the country. And secondly, we found out that in areas where the prevalence of anemia among women was higher, the prevalence was higher among the children as well. Thirdly, we found that in areas where women literacy rates were high, the prevalence of anemia among women was lower. So you might ask how any of this is of any relevance. So this kind of information can actually help the administrators to decide what kind of policy has to be implemented where and when. For example, strategies can be reviewed urgently in the high burden clusters, whereas the low burden areas can focus more on the preventive measures. This is specifically relevant in this post-pandemic era where preventive public health policy is taking the center stage rather than the curative ones. So this kind of analysis, which can help any state or any country with the relevant data, can actually help the administrators to understand where to start from. And the beginning of any process can be the most challenging part, especially if it's a process of making a country as huge as India anemia-free, so that millions of girls like Reema can have a better chance at their future. Thank you so much.
Now, Emily, what did you think?
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when I say thank you and what a wonderful presentation. Thank you for shedding light on such a prevalent issue in your country. Now, you mentioned a little bit about government policies and what is being put in place already, but you didn't go into detail about that. I was wondering, based on what your information shows, so what your research has been looking at, what would you say that the government should take out of that, or what could government policies do with your research?
Okay, so the government, so with this kind of analysis, we have an idea now that what kind of, so there is a country, then there's a state, and then there are districts. So once we analyze the data, the ground level data, we have clusters. So we know which neighborhood is affected and how. So the administrators at the ground level can then decide that which policy or what kind of changes or strategies they need to bring in that particular district. And then they can collaborate within themselves according to the clusters that have, suppose, high prevalence. So the administrators in those areas, in those districts, in charge of those districts can collaborate amongst themselves, and then they can implement various policies and see whether that these policies which already exist are reaching the people that need them or not.
My name is Milind Ukey. I'm an engineering student doing Masters in Technology and Development at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. During my Master's program, I got an opportunity to discover about the various development concerns in India. And I realized that the malnutrition has been one of the most serious development concerns and also the root cause of several non-communicable diseases, not only in India, but also in many other countries. So that's why I started developing my interest and working towards addressing the malnutrition among children under the 2 years of age. According to the Lancet Medical Journal, around 3.1 million children dies because of the malnutrition. And these results have been published by Lancet Medical Journal for annually. I cannot imagine if something like this happened to my niece Pari, who is just 1 month old. There are several studies that recommend exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life to have a better start. But I must say that the breastfeeding, even if exclusive, can be suboptimal if the technical skills and the practices are not appropriate. So here, in order to tackle this issue, we conducted the first experimental research in which we examined the impact of effective breastfeeding practices on the nutritional outcomes. So in our study, we counseled the mothers who were in the last month of their pregnancy with the effective breastfeeding techniques. In the other control group, we had mothers who were practicing the traditional way. So in the research, the counseling was done with the help of health spoken tutorials which are designed at IIT Bombay. These tutorials are the series of videos that teaches about maternal factors, breastfeeding techniques, and the complementary feeding, and many more. These tutorials are available on YouTube in 35 Indian languages. So let's move to the results. We observed that in the group where the mothers were counseled about the breastfeeding techniques, there was 3 times lesser prevalence of undernutrition among the children. These results were irrespective of the birth weights and the maternal factors. So what is the importance of a study in the public health perspective? So in the time of pandemic, when the continuity of health services became challenging, we provided a pathway by which the existing government programs can provide and also reduce the malnutrition at an early stage of life. So imagine a child, let's say my niece Pari. If she has been given a proper nutritional care at an early stage, she would grow healthy, she would grow taller, and also she will have performed well in his academics. She might have land in a decent job. And the billion of children like Pari can have a better life. So I stop here with a question that what more should be done in order to tackle the malnutrition across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Milind. Now, Emily, any questions?
Yes, thank you very much again on behalf of the audience. And perhaps there are some in the audience who are researchers themselves and would be interested to know a little bit more about the design of your research. So your research design, specifically what it was and why you selected that specific research design.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So the research was conducted in the Banaskantha district of Gujarat. The participants, as I mentioned, were the pregnant mothers, and these were mothers. This is an experimental study in which we had 2 groups, experimental and the control group. So the participants were divided equally, and in the experimental group, we counseled mothers about the breastfeeding techniques. So this was the design of the study.
Yes.
That would be all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.